Well, I think it's 1 o'clock, so it's time to start with this seminar on gut health. I'm very happy to be here today, to be with you with this event on gut health. And I'm happy to see that so many people have showed up. And I would like to extend a warm welcome to everybody who is joining us online at a distance. A few words about myself. My name is Vincent ter Beek. I'm editor for Pig Progress, and I shall be the host of this event that lasts for roughly 90 minutes. I will not do that on my own. I am joined by Dr. Torben Leerman of Provita, Dr. Lea Huberts Hansen of Christian Hansen, by René Bonenkamp of Schothouse Feed Research, and by Yoko Noguchi of Danisco Animal Nutrition, part of IFF. They will all give their presentations on the theme of gut health and why is that theme so important. And I think the answer to that is related to knowledge. In the past, quite a lot of antibiotics were used, as well as zinc oxide, to ensure a good gut health with piglets. And exactly that is a bit of a tricky issue, because these days antibiotics are being discouraged in many countries, and zinc oxide, you find that is being phased out in more and more countries. So all of a sudden we wonder, how do we get that gut health? Well, how do we achieve gut health without these ingredients in the toolbox? And to that, knowledge can help. So we'll hear a lot about new innovations, new ideas, how to ensure this gut health without all these all the tools, so to say. Before we start, a few words. Each speaker has roughly 18 minutes to speak, and after that there will be a short time for question and answers. And I'm very pleased now to introduce the first speaker, and he traveled quite a while to get here, just like me. Schothouse Feed Research is an independent research organization in the Netherlands, and René Bonenkamp is there a senior researcher swine and product manager swine. Today he will speak about nutritional support towards gastro-intestinal tract health. Give him a great round of applause.
Is it working? Yeah, perfect. Well, welcome everybody this afternoon. Very happy to be here, and thanks a lot to Pig Progress to give us the opportunity to talk here. I'm René Bonenkamp. I'm product manager swine for Schothouse Feed Research. You can also say SFR, it's easier to pronounce. But somebody who can say Schothouse very well, and at the end of this session, come to me and I will give you a nice treatment. So what are we going to do is nutritional support towards GIT health, gastro-intestinal tract, gut health, gastro-intestinal functionality. There are a lot of words about gut health, but I hope to give you some indication, some support, how you can play or mix with nutrition to get some sense out of the gut for the pig. So I want to bring you actually to a journey from front to back, because gut health is all the way that the animals start eating until the manure is coming out. And those are two elements we measure every day, hopefully, feed intake, and we see what the manure quality is. But what's happening in between, that's still the big mystery, and I'm already managing expectations here. I will not solve all for you today. Sorry for that. But what I will do is actually bring you a little bit of journey from front, so the feed intake. Then I will talk a little bit more about the stomach, and I think that's a very forgotten organ in the animal of swine, where you can still do already a lot for gut health. And then a little bit about intestinal development. But we start with the problem of the challenge. I see it as a challenge, it's not a problem anymore, because we make our life more miserable than we probably need to do, but okay, that's the situation. Genetics is improving, genetics giving us animals that can perform better, more efficient. But we have to face a lot of things like environment and the microbiome that are challenging the animal to stay healthy. And that's something we need to do in the gut, because feed is going into the mouth, is coming out at the end. So that's the phase and the organs where we need to solve that. And that's always happening with the young animal, the piglet. And there are a couple of challenges we are facing already for a couple of years. Maybe early in Europe type of regions, but also here in the Asian country Pacific, you see also more these kind of challenges where less is possible to have a safety in the feed to have a safety gut. It's about zinc, it's about copper, but also antibiotic use. And secondly, and that's also how SFR is actually trying to help you as feed producers or animal producers. The grow finisher pig is not the same as a small piglet, and that's especially happening in the gut, and therefore we need to find out much more to understand, okay, how to feed a grower, a pig, a sow or a piglet to get that maximum out of the gut function. And for example, this is one of the things we do a lot in SFR, is that we create nutrients specific for subspecies. So this is the energy value, like e-piglet. We developed a system through digestibility trials and model calculations that we can calculate specifically on an e-piglet value. So not a standard NE value, but specifically for piglet. So that you understand that raw materials are not always as good digested by a young piglet versus an old animal. And so therefore we have the matrix adapted to that and per raw material. So I kick off with feed intake. I just have some phrases here. I can show you a lot of details about trials of feed intake and where everything is coming from. But this is very typical what is often forgotten. Actually, a piglet likes to forage. They like to play. They like to see what is interesting. So that's also what you see if you want to improve the feed intake with a piglet. Actually, how diverse you make it, the better it is. And that's completely contradictory to what a feed mill wants. But a feed mill wants to have a good quality feed, which is standardized, constant, and the farmer can feed very easily in the farm. But we are often forgotten that a piglet is really wants to see some varying things. So those are a couple of things how to think about feed intake for piglets. However, we also know that if you're making a pellet feed, and that is obvious, the one that is making the most efficient out of feed intake, is that a pellet can be hard or soft. And that's really depending on what you put in the feed, but especially also the process, or the production process. So there's been a lot of tests, and this is the study we did ourselves. So we had a couple of differences, pellet hardness, and also the strength within the pellet. So there's two different kind of measurements. But very obvious what we found is that the harder the pellet, the less the piglet wanted to eat. So there's one of the measurements you can take already before you're going to feed to the animal, is to make sure that your pellet quality is the best. Because then your feed intake is the best, and then we can talk about what's in the feed. Because when it's not coming into the animal, I think we have no discussion about what product or what raw material is best. And that's actually the same also on the choice of raw materials. This is an overview of 3 types of raw materials, so rice, barley and maize, where we put a line at 50% more or less, which is like a preference, and if it's above, then you can say it's a preferred raw material. But here, for instance, on this region, especially when you take rice and you have unhulled brown or white extruded, you see that there's a difference of preference of the piglet. So rice is not rice. You have to make sure that you take the right rice source or right processed product for piglets to make sure that the feed intake is right. And it's the same for maize and barley, where you see some preferences in the beginning is good, but at the end it can be lower or even higher. And that's really depending on the batches and whether it's extruded or not. So again, processing of raw material as such can also be a key player for feed intake. Then I want to move to stomach function, because I think that is a very important factor in the animal. Of course, for the piglet, but also keep in mind that especially when a sow is in a high metabolic state during lactation, there's also stomach functions that need to be perfect. We sometimes underestimate the importance of a stomach health in a sow, but you know, all stomach erosions problems, that is happening a lot with sows. So that is also a key function organ for the sow to have good performance. But essential, the function of the stomach is to acidify the feed, and that acidification will help to pre-digest the feed, and that is key for the good digestibility in the intestine. Very basic material, but we often forget how important it is and what we actually do. Well, just to have a different. So if you take the stomach as a human versus the pig, then we have actually the pig has a big storage place. And that's actually a thing we have to make sure that we use that, because it's there in the animal, and it also can make efficiency better and digestion better. So the one side you want to acidify, but the other side you also want to increase the retention time to make sure that a lot of enzymatic activity is activated, or acidification is on optimum. Because this is actually where we have to target that. This is the pig, and if you're looking at stomach versus the ceca and the intestines and the mouth, there's always a certain level of bacteria. And it can be good bacteria, can be bad bacteria, but we want to control that, because we are asking the animal to grow, and we don't want him to spend energy to target or to fight with bacteria or diseases. So we need to prepare the animal very well. Well, if you then look at the stomach, if you take the piglets as measured, it's around 5 around in the stomach. Then it goes up, of course, in the intestine because of the enzymes. And also on the colon, it's around 6.8 to 7. But if we now take the variation, which is measured in animals, it really is from, in the stomach, it goes from 1.5 to 5.5. And also along the tract, you see a lot of variations in the animal. And that's natural, it's a natural thing. But if you're looking at feed, and you want to acidify the feed, it will never go down more than 5.5 or 6. And when you give then extra water, which makes a perfect balance to get a perfect production, you always end up more than 6 or even 7, because water is always around 7 or even higher. And that is a challenge, because then the feed needs to be reduced until preferably 3.5 or even lower pH to get the optimum digestion. So that's a big challenge. So if you don't control it very well, or the animal has a problem with that, you get impaired nutrient digestion, and then you get more undigested nutrients into the intestine. And that will challenge the whole part of proliferation of pathogenic bacteria, production of toxics, etc. And when you also don't have a good microbial barrier function, it even adds up an extra. So at the end, that's where a lot of post-weaning diarrhea is coming from. So therefore, it's very important to use the function of the gut, of the stomach, and also help the animal, especially in the early life, to optimize that function. How can you control that then in nutrition? Because you cannot see inside the animal what is happening. So the only thing, a couple of things you can do, is to control and calculate or measure like the acid binding capacity. And actually the acid binding capacity is something where you can measure how big the buffer capacity is of the feed. So how many acid is the feed taking over, which is not coming into action for the stomach, which actually you want. So it's a measurement, and that's quite known. So you go into the lab, you take the raw material or the feed, and then you measure how much base or acid you need to go from a certain basic pH to pH 4 often, which is called the ABC4. And then you know a number of buffer capacity. And when you measure that for each raw material, and then you also measure it on your feed, then you have a good indication how you can control that. Well, a certain couple of things that are influencing on raw materials is like energy, starch and fat. They actually don't have much effect on ABC4. But if you're looking at crude protein sources and acids and minerals, they all have quite a big influence on that ABC value. So the higher the ABC value, the higher the buffer capacity, just to get you an indication of the number. If you then look to feedstuffs, there's quite a big variety in buffer capacity. Well, the often used raw materials, they are quite okay, yeah? The wheat, barley or the maize. But when you go to the more protein sources, and especially in piglet feed, you want to have for palatability like fish meal or whey powder, skim milk powder for your digestibility of proteins, you actually increase the buffer capacity. So you have to compensate that. And that's also always the struggle we have as a nutritionist. I want to have the fast growth, but I also want to have the health. And in this case, you are balancing both, because the protein of these kind of products is perfect for digestion, but it also buffer your feed, so the risk of undigested raw materials going through into the intestine is rather high. So protein sources have a greater impact on acid binding capacity than cereals. But when we look then to the organic acids and the minerals, that's where you're playing field as a nutritionist to play with other things. So if your buffer capacity is quite low, you are actually allowed to use a little bit more of these kind of minerals because they are often the buffers. Like the limestone, very cheap raw material. You formulate a diet, some limestone comes in, makes it cheap, very nice. Good calcium source, nothing wrong with it. But there's a buffer capacity because it's calcium carbonate, and carbonate is binding the H pluses, which are the acid molecules. So you have a big buffer in your feed. So that is very important why you can use the ABC value to control that and to balance that. On the other hand, you have also the tools like the organic acids, which can help you to lower down the buffer capacity because they all have a negative value. And formic acid, which is the smallest acid actually we use as a molecule in feed, has also the biggest capacity to donate an H plus molecule to acidify. Of course, it's a very risky raw material in your feed factory because it also eats your pipes in the factory. But okay, there are a couple of things you can do to save that. So we did also some tests with this ABC value because you can calculate, but then you have to look how that works for the animal. And this is an example where we tested an ABC low value diet versus a high one. And then you see a very clear response of 8% better body weight for a low ABC value diet. So it works, it really works. Second thing of the stomach is stomach retention. So what time does it have in the stomach to stay there, the feed, to make sure that everything is going into a mix, because that's very important. Well, one of the key elements is particle size, because when you have the blue dots is the more fluid material and the red dots is more the coarser material, the stomach will always flow the fluid material quicker through the intestine than the coarser material or the fixed material. And that's also seen in this graph, the solid state versus the liquid. So the solid is more linear response versus the liquid state, which is more exponential. So that's going quicker first to the intestine than the solid state. So it's very important that you make sure that when the animal is eating, so that mixing water and feed is going in the right balance and stays for a long time. Because the more it mixed here, the more generally and slowly it will go into the intestine and the more predigestion you have. And this is an example how you can show that then in the animal. So in this case, brown rice versus white rice. 2 and 8 hours after digestion of ingestion. And you see very clearly that the brown rice, which is characterized by having some hulls or wheat, the outer layers, the bran layers, they are keeping the material longer in the stomach because they have an absorbing capacity of fluids. Versus the white rice, which is more quicker digested or going through the stomach. So in the beginning it looks quite good after 2 hours, but after 8 hours this is already quite a fluid system, and with the brown rice it's still like a very compact brew. So that helps a lot for the predigestion. And that's also one of the things we take in account next to ABC, from okay, what kind of raw materials do you choose to get a function or to get influence on the retention time. So these are quite a lot of raw materials that have been tested on water holding capacity. You also have the phrase water absorbing capacity. That is not always the same because the absorbing capacity is how much water it can take, but it's better to look at what it really keeps holding on. And one of the things that is often used in Europe is sugar beet pulp. It's absorbing a lot of water, but it's also holding it. I once did a trial with piglets where I gave them 12.5% sugar beet pulp, really from weaning onwards to 25 kilogram. And they actually were growing perfectly. There was no issue, no difference with a normal diet. But you see that the manure was very sticky. So the walls of the pens were sticky with manure. So that is choices to make on raw materials. So you see as well that the normal use like barley, wheat, corn, they really don't have a good capacity to keep the water fixed. So then you automatically end up with the more fibrous products. If we then take the step into intestinal development, I want to kick off with starch. So this is the mouth of the animal and the intestinal tract. So we have discussed intake and the stomach. And now let's see what's happening in the small and the large intestine. Well, the small intestine is very, the key element where you utilize your nutrients. That is where the moment all the nutrients needs to go into the intestine, into the bloodstream, into any system that metabolizes the animal and support it. So this is all the place where starch is digested or utilized. So it's very important for a piglet mainly, but also for a grow finisher pig, how much starch you want to give and what kind of form you want to give it. Then you also have the resistant starch, which is actually already fermented in the end small intestine, which can already be an issue for small piglets because they are not developed well here in the end, especially also not in the colon. So you have to be careful giving that resistant starch. So again, there is also the starch analysis very important. Starch is not always starch. Actually, you have to look in what kind of resistant starch you have. And you have to be careful within that, because if there is not a good fermentation or digestion of starch, it will end up as an undigested nutrient or raw material in the colon, and you get a lot of issues again on diarrhea. So therefore we have been experiencing a lot with processing again. So in the factory, pre-treat the raw materials like starch to get them good, available and attractive for pigs. If you do that for maize, there's actually not really difference if you do that, except the fact that maybe if you use a different kind of extraction here, it will be better. But especially wheat and barley are really responding well if you take a heat treatment. So you see more gelatinized starch coming out of this raw materials, which increases also the viscosity. Now viscosity for piglet is good, not for poultry, but for pigs good, because then you can play with retention time in the stomach, and it helps to get a slow passage through the small intestine. So the effects of heat treatment of gelatinized starch content and viscosity seems feedstuff dependent. So these are only 3 examples, but for sure if you do more, you will see more differences. Second part is protein digestion, very key element. If you're looking, and this is also the work we do a lot within SFR, looking at the age of the piglet and looking what is now the digestibility of the protein of different raw materials. And that's a constant process we do. And this is also where we want to differentiate the digestion versus a grow finisher animal versus a young animal. So here, like milk powder is quite high in digestion, but again you see when the piglet is older, it also increases 2%. Bean meal as well. So you can use soybean meal, but you have to be careful on the digestion side of protein. And of course, if you increase already in the stomach the enzyme production and fermentation capacity in the colon, then you have less risk of protein problems due to digestion. Because if you have protein fermentation, this is really from a late research in Wageningen 22, they looked at 15, 19 and 23% of protein, and they looked at the animals which have diarrhea. Then even in the 15% diet, they had problems. So it's really important that's not only the crude protein level, but it's about the digestibility, and that's the key thing. Then going to fiber. Fiber is the next element of influence. We already talked about the viscosity, water capacity, but there's also like functional fiber, physical effect, bacterial binding. Just shortly, and I will go a little bit quicker here, just to see. This is the, let's say, the part of analysis we can do on fiber. And a very key element is there, are you talking about fermentable fiber or inert fiber? And that is also the playing field to get a good intestinal health. Use a little bit more in inert fiber in the younger animal and more fermentable at the end, because they are more able to ferment at the end. And why inert? And I showed you a small activity scheme here. So normally the E. coli will attach to the intestinal wall. If you then put a wheat bran type product in, that could be any kind of fiber type, but in the coarser material, then actually these E. coli are attached to the raw material and the coarser particle size. So it doesn't have a nutritional influence, but actually it helps the animal to keep clean. And last but not least, and then hopefully I'm on time, is that fat is also important. I have only one slide here, but this is also one nutritional element you can think of to look at the balance between unsaturated and saturated fatty acids. And this is also where we did a lot of tests within our group, is that the higher you go in US ratio, of course, keep economics as well in mind, then the absorption is better. Going then to my last slide. Sometimes you think back to front. Is that wrong? I don't think so, because at the end you look at the manure and look how the animals are performing. But it's very important to look also what is then the feed intake correlated to that manure. How do you support the stomach? Are you doing the right things? And are you putting a lot of elements in the intestinal development to make sure that all the inside is covered? With that, I want to thank you. And I want to highlight one thing more, is that we have a feature nutrition course with SFR. It's going more in deep in these kind of elements. So I want to invite you to take a leaflet or ask us, scan the QR code, and then you're able actually to learn more about these elements through the poultry, ruminant and the swine side. And this is always in June in Holland. So thank you for the attention, and happy to answer some questions.
Looking at the audience, there's time for one quick question. Anybody? I have one.
Good.
You spoke a lot about stomach and the role in the gastro-intestinal tract. You also mentioned that there's not a lot of attention for the stomach. Why?
Good question. Now, there's a lot of testing done in the intestine. Because the stomach as an organ is not very sexy. It's like a bag where everything comes in, and then it is directly going out in the intestine. And that's where the utilization of nutrients is coming from. And that's where people want to influence the nutrient uptake and the utilization. But I think if you test more this kind of pre-digestion, one example is fermentation of raw materials. There's a good example that's actually where you use a cow kind of system to get a better digestion for the animal. But still the stomach is also that kind of type. And why are we looking so good in a rumen and a dairy cow, what's happening in the stomach, but not in a monogastric animal? So that's why I think there's a lot of opportunities there.
You've given it a little bit of a revival then to look at the stomachs. Thank you, René. Excellent presentation. I see there was a question, but unfortunately we're a bit pressed for time. I'm sorry about that. But do keep it in mind, our speakers won't run away. I'm going towards the second speaker, and she's already standing next to me. And that's Dr. Lea Hubert-Berg-Hansen, and she's product manager swine at Christian Hansen. Her presentation will focus on gut integrity in piglets as a line of first defense, and she'll discuss the importance of gut integrity in young piglets, discuss the role of probiotics and how those can help prevent a compromised gut barrier. Lea, take it away.
Forward. Perfect. Thank you very much for the introduction. I'm very pleased to be here today and get the opportunity to speak to all of you. I'm Lea Hubert-Hansen at Christian Hansen, Technical Product Manager for our swine solutions. And today I would like to introduce to you a little bit about gut integrity in young piglets, something that I would like to call the first line of defense, and also how probiotics can have an influence on gut integrity, and also explain a little bit on different methods on how you can assess gut integrity both in vitro and in vivo in the piglet. So, looking at the first line of defense, the functional intestinal barrier is very essential for having a healthy gut in the piglet. Here I will just shortly introduce you to what I mean when I'm talking about the intestinal barrier. On this illustration you see an illustration of a healthy gut, where you have an intestinal epithelium consisting of different epithelial cells, and then that one is covered by this mucus layer, and then out in lumen you have commensal bacteria and other compounds floating around, you could say. Behind the intestinal epithelium is the bloodstream, and that's the one we would like to protect and thereby keep the integrity of the gut. The functions of the intestinal barrier is that it is for nutrient absorption, it's a physical and biochemical barrier as well, and it also sends and responds to microbial stimuli as well as participate in immune responses. So this is how a healthy gut looks like. Here the bacteria and any other compounds are retained on the right side, so to say. We also have another situation which is what we call leaky gut, or a state of dysbiosis, where you will find a more compromised intestinal barrier. Here you see that there can be some inflammation induced, and actually all these pathogens and undigested feed proteins and other antigens, they are allowed to be translocated through the barrier and cause damage to the pig. So the first line of defense is crucial when it comes to young piglet. It is crucial for the survival of the piglet and the growth of the piglet. As you know, the piglet is born quite with an undeveloped immune system, why it is important for it to stay with the sow, which it depends on when it comes to maternal immunity via the milk. And then during the suckling period, it will slowly start developing its barrier function. As you know, in a more commercial setup, we do wean the piglets quite early compared to natural conditions. When we do that, we can go in and compromise the development, and we start taking away the antibodies via the milk coming from the sow. In such a case, we also, when we wean the piglet, we kind of expose them to many different factors that can go in and further compromise the gut barrier of the piglet. So that's why it's super essential to focus on the piglet, as it is its first line of defense. It's part of the immune system to have this developed gut barrier. So with that short introduction, I will start focusing on probiotic, because that is what Christian Hansen is about. We love bacteria. Probiotics are live bacteria that, when administered in adequate amounts, it will pose a health benefit to the host. And here I have tried to put on 3 different factors for you that I believe have could be a mode of action of a probiotic product, and that has an important impact on gut integrity in piglets and also in other animals. The first one is the fact that the probiotic bacteria has to be close to the intestinal epithelium. It could be adhering or colonizing, and thereby having an impact directly there. Also, it's important if they can somehow increase the secretion of mucins. And finally, if they can somehow prevent intestinal permeability and keep this state of a healthy gut. For the rest of my presentation, I will exemplify some findings with our newest probiotic solution, our next generation probiotic called Solprime, which is a product for sows and piglets. It's a dual strain bacilli-based probiotic consisting of Bacillus subtilis and Bacillus ameliocephalus. So we start with the first factor, which is the adherence to the intestinal epithelium. And here I start in the gut of the piglet. In this case, I'm showing some results, some recent results from a study where we were administering Solprime to sows and piglets, and then in the end of the suckling period, we euthanized these piglets and did some histology, and in this case, the fish method, to identify the 2 probiotic strains in the gut of the piglet. And what we could conclude here was the fact that we actually do see that our probiotic strains prefer to stay close to the epithelial cell line, and they like to somehow, both be in the digester but also very close to the surface of the villi. And that is somehow an indication that they prefer to stay there and not out in lumen, and then they actually have the advantage of interacting with the gut barrier. Now I go in a little bit to the in vitro part of adherence. In this case, I will show you just a result from a cell line study. Here we use intestinal cells to create this monolayer, where we would then administer both a pathogenic E. coli in this case, as well as the probiotic strain or product. And then in the end of this assay, you can then quantify the adhering E. coli at this monolayer with and without the presence of the probiotic strains. In this case, we looked at the intestinal HT29 epithelial cell line, which is a cell line that can both be producing mucus and also not producing mucus. And what we found here was that we saw a great potential of these specific two probiotic strains to go in and competitively exclude the presence of E. coli F4 to these epithelial cell lines with around 50%. So, and this is very important also, as you heard before. It's for E. coli to have a great consequence and diarrhea in piglets. It's important that they stay close to the epithelial cells, and also for the toxin production to go in and have an impact. So if we move on to the mucus layer, which is this kind of layer that is covering the intestinal cell line in the gut, which is part of the first line defense. I will start again with the in vitro method, again with intestinal cells, in this case goblet cells, that can produce mucin. And here we add the bacilli-based probiotics to this culture, and then we can quantify the production of the two mucins, MUC2 and MUC3. Here, I would like to underline the fact that we do know that probiotic strains matter. A Bacillus subtilis, it's not just a Bacillus subtilis. We do know that they have different genetic properties and thereby also act differently. And this is also what we can see here, where we actually do see that these 4-5 different Bacillus subtilis do induce the secretion of mucin in a strain-dependent manner. What is of course interesting is then if you can find a strain that is superior in inducing this secretion of mucins for both MUC2 and MUC3, which is the case for this Bacillus subtilis number 4, which is also the strain part of our probiotic product Solprim. And what we like to do in Christian Hansen is, of course, to understand the potential of our strains in the laboratory and then go out and see if we can confirm somehow these findings in the animal. And this is what we've done here, again, with piglets just before weaning that has been born and raised by sows that have been administered with Solprim. And here we found that when we euthanized and collected the intestinal tract, we found that the thickness of the mucosa was significantly larger in these Solprim piglets. Moving on to the final one, which is to prevent the intestinal barrier to be more permeable to avoid this leaky gut situation. I would first just show you how we try to assess the potential of our probiotic strains in vitro, and that we do via this tier method that some of you have probably heard about, which is the trans-epithelial electrical resistance assay, where you kind of measure the resistance between the two different sides of an epithelial cell line. So here we again have an epithelial culture, or a cell culture, where we create a monolayer. In this case, we often work with the CACO2 cell line here at Christian Hansen. And then you look at the relative tier value, meaning that the higher the tier value on the y-axis, the more strengthened the barrier is, you could say. And then what we also often see is if we pose some kind of challenge to this cell line, we see a decrease in the tear value, meaning that the permeability is getting larger and more antigens can kind of pass the cell line. So here I would like to show an example on how we can assess this permeability in vitro using the the Solprime strain Bacillus subtilis. In this case, we have used hydrogen peroxide, which is a reactive oxygen species, as a challenge in this model. So we know that when we add this H2O2 to this model, it will cause a tear decrease, meaning that there will be a more leaky gut kind of situation. What we do find is that if we include the Bacillus subtilis from the Solprime product, it kind of go in and counteract this decrease in tear, as you can see on the yellow line. That meaning in the end of the assay, 16 hours later, we do see that we have a significant difference between hydrogen peroxide alone and then combining it with the probiotic strain. So that's of course very nice to set up such a nice or such a kind of challenge model in vitro, but again we go out and we can see if we can kind of confirm these findings out in the real animal, and that is what I will show you here in the end, where we look at an E. coli challenged piglet, E. coli F18 nursery pig, where we have challenged the pigs and then we have euthanized them in the end of the study to perform this osm chamber kind of assay to assess the permeability of the gut in these pigs. So we have 3 groups of pigs. We have a negative control group, which has not been challenged with E. coli F18. Then we have a challenge group, and then we have the group with the challenge pigs also administered with the Bacillus subtilis strain from the Solprime product. Here you see a measure of both the paracellular and the transcellular permeability, meaning it's kind of crossing the border of the cells, both in between the epithelial cells but also through it. And fortunately, we saw what we hypothesized, that when you challenge a pig with E. coli, you find that there is some kind of leaky gut state where there is more permeability and more antigens and pathogens and so forth can cross the border. Well, we also see that in the negative control group, which were not challenged with E. coli, we find a significantly lower permeability, and we found that the piglets that were also eating feed with Bacillus subtilis in it could also prevent this permeability or leaky gut situation when they were challenged with the E. coli. So, with that, I would like to finalize my presentation with a few take-home messages. First of all, a functional intestinal barrier is super essential for having a healthy gut, especially in these young piglets that are quite naive when it comes to immunity and then that are posed towards these great risk factors post-weaning. We do believe that probiotics can be part of the solution to kind of prepare these piglets for the weaning, to make them more robust, and they can somehow improve this first line of defense. And I do believe if probiotics have the mode of action of both being close to the epithelial cell line, adhering to them, and also potentially competing for the space with pathogens, that's a really good thing. And also if they have the property of increasing the mucus layer, and then finally if they can prevent intestinal permeability and avoiding this leaky gut situation. So with that, I would like to thank you for your attention. I hope to see you maybe at our booth, Christian Hansen booth. We are really welcome if you would like to discuss further. And now I think I will welcome any questions there may be.
Indeed. Is there any question from the audience? Here. Right. There is a question. Wait a minute for the microphone, then everybody can hear it.
Thank you very much. You mentioned that probiotics are very important, especially at the beginning for newborn piglets, but for sure the most critical period for piglet life is after weaning, depending from 3 weeks to 4 weeks. And today, farmers have to do a lot of things to prevent diarrhea. In the past, you know, they used a lot of zinc oxide. It's over now, so we can use acidifiers, we can use some enzymes, and also the probiotics. What do you estimate, what is the percentage of the probiotics help to avoid diarrhea when you have different additives? Do you think if you add extra probiotic, you get, for example, very easily to say 10% it's more safety? Yeah. Can you give an answer?
Sure. My microphone is not on.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you very much for your question. I think it's a really relevant question, especially today when we have so many different options for going for different feed additives. And honestly, I can't tell you that if you add 2 additives, you get 20% improvement, and then 3 you will get 30. It really depends on the situation. We do believe that probiotics are part of the solution. It's, well, okay, it's a must. Yeah, it is a must, and we think it's part of the solution, but it cannot stand alone, and it really depends also on the challenge that the piglet is facing, because we do know there are lots of different challenges. What we do believe is that it all starts with the sow. If you want to have an impact around weaning and after weaning, we do believe you need to go via the sow so that the sow can excrete these beneficial bacteria already on day 1 in life. And that's where you can go in and really influence the immune system and also the gut barrier, so you kind of prepare them for this great challenge. Yeah.
Any other question from the audience? If it has to go through the sow, sorry, I'll shut up.
Would all probiotics work the same way, like you mentioned?
No. Okay, I have the microphone again.
Oh.
Thank you for the question. No, as I said, strain matters. So there are different genetic properties according to the strain and also according to the species of the probiotic product. In Christian Hansen, we actually spent quite some time to identify and select the best probiotic strains. This product that I'm mentioning here, it's been taking us almost 10 years from the idea to we stand out, and we have found the best strains. So it really depends on the strains that you select for the probiotic product. Yeah.
Thank you. Any other question? I think there is a hand in the back, but I'm not sure if that's related to a question or... No? Okay, there was a hand by accident. This gentleman has one more. Okay. A last quick one, and then we move on to the next speaker.
Following to your question, you are using, Christians are using spores, bacillus, yes? We know there are probiotics on the market, lactic acid bacteria.
Yeah.
Did you test different kind of probiotics, and what is your, and I think you are more believing on the spores as on the lactobacillus?
Honestly, it's about a practical aspect, you could say, because bacilli-based probiotics are coming in a spore form, meaning that they are very resistant to any other factors like pelletation or even storage, and also compatibility with other feed additives and antibiotics. So that is why we kind of focus on the bacilli-based probiotics for pigs at the moment. I do believe that there's a great opportunity in the future for us to investigate other kinds of bacteria, lactic acid producing ones, and also some more anaerobic ones, maybe when we understand how to protect them until they reach the site where they have to function. But it's important, I think most important is we want our bacteria to be alive when they enter, because otherwise they won't do much. So that is why we stick with the bacilli-based, at least when you need to apply them via the feed.
Thank you very much, Leah. Please join me in giving her a big round of applause. Thank you very much. We will move on with the third speaker, and that is Dr. Torben Liermann. He is Managing Director at Provita Supplements, headquartered in Pinneberg in northern Germany. His presentation will revolve around a holistic approach to improve gut integrity by using feed additives. He shall touch on, for instance, short-chain fatty acids, solid-state fermentation, as well as activated zinc oxide. Dr. Liermann, good luck.
Thank you very much for the introduction. My name is Tom Liermann, Managing Director of Provita Supplements. My background is animal nutrition, so that's also the responsibility I had during my face in Provita supplements. Today I want to share with you some aspects of the holistic approach of how to improve and how to establish a concept of gut integrity and animal nutrition. Going back a little bit to the basics, when we talk about what are the main factors, we heard a lot of factors from the before speakers. What is important? For sure, we as a private company, we have a commercial interest when it comes to the establishment of additives. But in the end effect, we have to use them in the right manner. The use of antibiotics around the world is still a heavy debate and is still a big discussion, because these substances, when they are used in the right manner, still have a big influence on what we call gut integrity and the expression of gut integrity. Going around the world, we are mainly talking about the same genetics we are feeding, but on the other hand, we do it with different nutritional stories, and this is also dedicated to the usage of antibiotics. In some regions of the world, especially in Europe, we already have a strong and a deep experience to reduce the use of antibiotics, or to establish feeding concepts absolutely without the use of antibiotics. And the minimization of the use of antibiotics, this is in the end effect a very, very important point. All factors which are taken into consideration of a nutritional concept to minimize. The farmer, in the end effect, is the weakest part in this whole chain of the whole production. But in the end effect, also they have to be convinced and they have to understand why the reduction of probiotics is so important. Because when we talk about what we can influence or how we can influence directly what happens inside the animal, we should demonstrate, and this is also a clear goal of our company. How can we do it? What are the right feeding concepts? As we already heard, okay, there is no one concept or a concept at all that really hits everything, but we have to make our thoughts clearly to create superior feeding concepts, because when we talk about intestinal health, gut integrity, and especially the definitions and the goals we take into consideration, for sure, we want to work on the one hand on the side of pathogenic bacteria or reduction of pathogenic bacteria. On the other side, we want to stimulate the positive bacteria from a nutritional perspective. We want to promote gut function through our feeding concepts and doing the right things. And for sure, at the end, to have a good influence on the immune system. How can we do that? We have the possibility to take different components, additives, ingredients, and all the things into consideration. We are already, I will not say behind the level of using zinc oxide, pharmaceutical levels of zinc oxide. You already get a certain impression of the usage of organic acids, probiotics, and for sure also using further components like fermented products, diverse variations of short, medium chain fatty acids, amino acids, and for sure when it comes to this immune side, there are much more components to take into consideration. In the end effect, the solution is, or what is the knowledge or the superiority, to place them, to put them in the right manner. And this is really a challenge. For sure, this is a challenge for the industry, this is a challenge for the feed producers, but this is also a challenge in the end effect for the farmer itself, because the farmer itself also has to understand to put it in the right way. And this is the secret, that we need this targeted manner. Not every component works additionally. This is the truth. We have to take them and we have to put them in a feeding concept which really works. What could be overviews, and this information is really limited. What I showed you here is, I call it a meta-analysis of a very well-known swine nutritionist. What are the possibilities on the additive side to take into consideration? What is the efficacy, how the efficacy can be rated? Is there an additional efficacy, an efficacy per se of every individual additive? And what is the potential for the development or for the future, which additive makes sense or which components does not make sense to be taken into consideration or to be put into a nutritional story in the end effect. And when you have a closer look at the top, you see, okay, pre-fermentation and inoculation, on the other hand, fermentable substrates, prebiotics, probiotics, they may have the potential for a better development or for further development steps. I also would like to take still the zinc oxide into consideration, because within Provita Supplements we are also working on a technology and invented this technology that also with components which might be not from a 2013 perspective have the potential for further development, but even feed additives also have to be more effective. When you look at the bottom, and for sure this is then the main part when it comes to management, and with all the pluses you see here, the potential for development, for sure there is a big potential still doing and having the right management. So when we keep it very short, we can say that the influence on gut health is a combination, is an interaction of what we know clearly from feeding. We have to do it in the right way. We have to have a clear understanding of housing, and what I said at the bottom, also the management and the organization of the management, the feeding concept or the feeding concept in the end effect, which is used in the housing concept. This is the biggest challenge, again, finally, for the farmer. So intestinal nutrition, and we can influence the intestine with our measures, with our concepts of nutrition, and we clearly have to take that into consideration, providing the right nutrients, providing the right feedstuffs, and the goal in the end effect is what is the best measure to support in the end effect the intestine. When we come especially to piglet nutrition, and this is the most sensible phase around weaning, that we have to be clear with these what we call hunger periods. So weaning the little piglet for sure will lead to an insufficient supply of nutrients, and nutrients per se are in the end effect the most important components for the right nutrition and for the right development. Also on the other side, the main risky components for preventing or stimulating diarrhea. We have to take into consideration when it comes to this weaning concepts, and there are many, many different weaning concepts of piglets, what are the right measures again to be taken into consideration to stimulate feed intake. And when we talk about feed intake, do we have an idea about feed intake? How high is the feed intake? And when we look into the literature, and this is an extract out of a study from the working group of Ventus Bravenberg. In this study, they had a deeper, they had a deeper look in how high is the feed intake, and the feed intake as a clear parameter for the energy supply. And when you investigate, when you investigate on animals around weaning, and when you define a certain energy level only for maintenance, not for growth, that up to 90% of the animals around weaning have a tremendous energy deficit. This is what we have to take into consideration in our weaning concepts. But still, in the first or the second day after weaning, and this is this sensible phase, and how smooth can we create it for this little animal to go through these phases with less risk in the end effect. What I said, still day 1 after weaning, or still day 2 after weaning, we have up to 40, up to 50, up to 60% of the animals in a deficit, in an energy deficit, and this means less growth, and less growth, less energy, nutrient supply, for sure has a tremendous influence on the whole metabolism And again, this has to be differentiated. What is the risk coming from the nutrients? We already heard some details about it, male digestion and all of these things. But on the other hand, also the pathogen side, because this is what we also can influence, and we have to take it into consideration when we talk about the right concepts for piglets. What we have done internally, and this is one part of our nutritional strategy, that we work with highly or higher available zinc oxide sources. The ban or the reduction of so-called pharmaceutical dosages will go around the world. This is also what we call a sustainable approach for the future, to reduce the use, the excretion of zinc oxide, and still within the zinc oxide we need sources which are higher available. Again, coming from a nutritional background, we have a strong idea about how to use zinc oxide again in the right manner. But with an activated source of zinc oxide, we are clearly following a gut integrity approach, and that a higher available and a higher reactive zinc oxide source could influence in the end effect the gut integrity, the gut system, that we clearly avoid the observations we see from this pharmaceutical and high dosing of zinc, that we can say that we can avoid gastro-intestinal lesions. We have an improved feed intake because usages of 2.5–3,000 ppm of zinc will suppress the feed intake. And what you've seen in the study before, we have to do everything with the little animal to stimulate feed intake. So finally, daily weight gain and feed conversion rate. These are again parameters the farmer could see we have to take into consideration for our concepts. So with a study we carried out in South America, we examined the influence on these activated zinc oxide on the permeability of the intestine. And within this study, where we compared dosages of zinc between 3,000 and going down to only 200 ppm, and what we clearly saw that these higher effective zinc oxide source significantly can reduce these what we call the leaky gut symptoms. And this is really an approach. It's not the silver bullet. This is clear, or this has to be clear. But again, using these components in the right manner, this is very crucial. We also investigated, and this is what we can see in piglet feeding, beneficial bacteria. How can we stimulate? And we know all about the toxicity of zinc, the toxicity of high dosing of zinc, but using a more and beneficial source, what we can see, and the influence of coli is very well known, so we can reduce E. coli drastically, and on the other side also stimulate what we call the beneficial bacteria in the feces quite well. Coming from a component like a zinc oxide, moving to the probiotics in the gut process. We already discussed a little bit the advantages of probiotics, so I will not go that into detail when it comes to probiotics at all. But again, also we have to use it in the right manner, having the right choice of the right probiotic strain, and also dosing, super dosing, maintenance dosing, challenge dosing. This is what we have to take into consideration, and for sure also dedicated to the species we are feeding. So we need the right application scheme, and we need the right nutritional story again also to incorporate probiotics into a concept to improve gut integrity. So showing you some results in sow feeding, differentiations between third litter, fourth litter, again stimulating with the dosages of probiotics, stimulating on the one hand the good bacteria and suppressing on the other side the bacteria we do not want, because, and this is also what we heard before, when we start in the sow feeding concept or a nutritional concept of feeding the sows in the right way with the right dosing of probiotics, we can prepare a lot of right things for the animals we are then taking care for, like the piglets we have to wean and the piglets we have to grow. Last but not least, what we call superior ingredients, and this is also a technology we prefer, because with producing so-called solid-state fermentation products, products which are based on selective Aspergillus strains, and these fermented on a wide range of substrates, so-called dried fungal fermentation products. You can see at least an impression how this works. It looks a little bit like in a big bakery, where we can ferment the right fungal strains on the right substrates. And the goal we want to achieve is that we can create products defined as carbohydrates. This is very well known when we talk, for example, of NSP enzymes. On the other side, we can also use the advantages of carbohydrate function to stimulate a better protein release effect. But these solid-state fermentation products, beside their carbohydrate functions, which for sure, and here you see 4 different mode of actions of stimulating the protein release from a carbohydrate function in a diet, or in the different characteristics of the materials we are using. They also have much more effects, what we call side effects or external effects. So what we did with these solid-state fermentation products, we also put them into a evaluation of gut integrity evaluation. And with these solid-state fermentation products, we carried out cell culture tests to get, with a method of IPEC J2 cell cultures, PCR evaluations, using different dosages of these solid-state fermentation products in combinations with DON, and to see, can we stimulate the gene expression as a model to describe what we call this gut integrity effect, or this tight junction effect. And last but not least, what we saw with a positive control, the combination of DON and the solid-state fermentation product, that we can stimulate the gene expression, and that we can prove in the end effect that these fermentation products on gut level have really nice side effects, which we can use again in a nutritional concept to feed piglets. Pardon? Last but not least, holistic feeding concepts. This is what we take into consideration. This is where we have the biggest experience with. So healthy microbiota, intestinal barrier evaluation, pathogen suppression, and for sure what we call the competitive exclusion. In the end effect, we want to promote the animals, we want to prevent on the other side, and this is, in the end effect, one of our professions, that we clearly understand nutrition and want to deliver solutions for the feed industry worldwide. Thank you very much for your attention. And I'm open for questions you might have.
Thank you very much, Dr. Lehrmann. Questions from the audience? Anybody? I heard you say a sentence in between. You were sure that a zinc oxide ban would go around the world. I mean, it might be expected that zinc oxide will be phased out in more countries. How can you be so certain that it will be going around the world? It will also affect Asia, in your opinion?
It already affects Asia, yes. The answer is easy. I think it's this what we call sustainability. We have to take care if we really want to wean animals and having such a big amount of excretion. So what we can do with being more precise with zinc oxide nutrition, we can reduce the zinc oxide usage of up to 90%. This is possible. We nowadays already have concepts working absolutely only with nutritional levels of zinc. But I think this is a job we all have to do when we want to be more sustainable. Yeah, so even if currently there may not be any legislation, it's wise to think ahead, because it is likely going to come. We have to work on that, any other question? How do you explain the working of activated zinc oxide in comparison to regular ones? How does that work exactly? We have a technology, that's why we call it activated, so we increase the energetic status of these zinc oxide. It is still a zinc oxide feed grade, but with this increased energy or internal energy level, we can use less and get the same effects. So it's a technological approach.
Thank you very much. I look for the last time into the audience. Anybody? Nope. I think the presentation has been very clear. Thank you very much. Once more, join me in giving him a round of applause. And that brings me to the last speaker of today. And Yoko Noguchi is already raising and making herself comfortable there. She is Senior Technical Service Representative North Asia at Danisco Animal Nutrition, part of IFF, and she shall be focusing on the nutribiotic state for optimized performance, with special attention for practical approaches. Good luck.
Thank you for your introduction. I'm Yoko Noguchi, Technical Service from North Asia, Danisco Animal Nutrition, part of IFF. For next slide, please. Oh, sorry. Sorry. For my slide, I would like to start with seeing the feed material market position. So nowadays, it is an international consensus about the price increase of cereal, and it's impacting whole market beyond animal industry. So here is the data from FAO telling us about the world cereal market position in this decade. So blue line is the production, and the gray line is the utilization, and the light blue bar is the stocks. So before 2018, the production level was exceeding the utilization, and the stock level was built up steadily. So there was a drought in 2018, and onwards, supply demand is in tight balance. So we see the stock level in light blue, the crop-like movement for recent few years. In 2022, again, we are facing 2% of production decrease because of several incidents happened last year. So therefore, it is predictable that grain supply and demand is in tight position for next few years. Now, looking at the consumption outlook up to 2031 from FAO survey, in the world, wheat is estimated to grow by 3% of metric ton, and corn by 8% metric ton in next decade. If we focus on Asia Pacific region for meat consumption per capita, pork is estimated to grow by 10%, chicken and beef by 1% each. So due to serious hit by ASF, as you know, in Asia region, the pork industry is now under the recovery period from that disaster. Therefore, the outlook is double-digit for growth. Still, 1% of production growth is considerable. When we see other regions transition by plateau or even decrease, especially for the developed countries. Pork industry expectation is highly notable, that worth further discussion of what we attempt to do within this industry under the high cereal competition. Effective material source utilization as feed is one of the top priority to be tolerable against the world material supply and cope with the strong demand in Asia. In order to optimize feed, it is crucial to understand swine metabolism of energy consumption to find any room for improving efficacy. If we look at distribution of total energy consumption by peak, 25% of energy is consumed for heat, 31% is consumed for maintenance, and 4% is consumed for urine and methane. Other 40% is for lean and fat, namely growth. If we want to have effective growth, it is to minimize other portion than lean and fat. Total maintenance energy is the second largest portion, and if we break down this fraction, half is for gut maintenance and other for the, half is the gut maintenance and the other half is for other maintenance energy. So reducing the gut maintenance energy is the most attainable portion to achieve better animal growth. Then the question may become, what is gut maintenance? To give it an answer, let us start from knowing the basal function of gut. Firstly, gut is part of digestive tract to digest and absorb of nutrition. This tract holds billions of bacteria called microbiome. Gut membrane is exposed to these bacteria, thus it works as first defense to protect animal from bacterial invasion. We consider these three functions are interactive with each other, and we call this concept Nutribiosis. We consider, so back into the first question, what is gut maintenance? The answer is to keep this Nutribiosis in favorable cycle that brings animal less consumption of energy and leave more energy for growth. When animal has unfavorable cycle of nutribiosis, typically we see diarrhea as clinical signage. In swine industry, piglets during weaning period, diarrhea is one of the biggest concern for the farmers, because weaning is such a stress for delivered piglets that exposed to environmental change and also for food alteration from milk to solid feed. Here shows a pancreatic enzyme production of piglet from birth to 6 weeks across weaning. Many trials shows a depression of endogenous enzyme production after weaning. The drop in enzyme production at the weaning is due to several factors, including low voluntary feed intake. At the weaning, commonly, piglet will start to produce the appropriate enzyme when more substrate is passing through the gut. Or dry feed eaten sporadically rather than the balanced diet milk provided by sow on regular basis. Because of these unique problems after weaning, we have found that young piglet respond best to complex of enzymes. Mixed enzyme not only deal with anti-nutrient factors that comes from key raw materials, but also supplement the piglet's reduced enzyme production that helps piglet digestion and ameliorate from diarrhea issue. Here, let us learn shortly about the anti-nutrient factor, how it's existing within raw materials. In case of corn, as you see the cross-section of on your left side, the protein is in red granule and starch is in black granule. Soybean, the picture on the right side, the protein is in blue, starch is in black, and cell wall are orange. In both of corn and soybean picture, you can clearly see that the protein and starch are encapsulated within the cell wall, which is the fiber complex of protein and starch. In order to release this packed nutrition, it is important to break down fiber complex so that the amylase and protease are accessible to these nutrients. Here is a case done in Vietnam with 360 heads of piglets up to 58 days old after weaning. It had two types of basal diet. One is control in blue, and another is modified diet in gray. Modified diet includes more fibrous byproduct of rice with lower feed cost. Porzyme TP100, the complex of enzyme production, which is containing silanase and beta-glucanase amylase in the protease, was fed over control and modified diet. The mixed enzyme addition helped more growth than control or modified diet. Therefore, we see the ratio of feed cost per weight gain. Mixed enzyme addition brought cost-effective growth by releasing cell wall-packed nutrition. It has also ameliorated diarrhea frequency when mixed enzyme was fed. So exogenous enzyme after weaning period helps piglet digestion and growth, and also reduced diarrhea. So far, we've been seeing the nutrition part within our concept of Nutribiosis. Next, I would like to talk about microbiota part. There are many commercialized products related to animal microbiota, but not all of them have solid back data. So for here today, I would like to take essential oil as for the case because it has good research work behind. In VIV Asia is an essential oil containing cinnamaldehyde and thymol. Here is an in vivo study, essential oil, revealing that it balances the microbiota population. The horizontal axis is indicating DNA guanine and cytosine content, and it tells you the type of bacteria. Comparing to control navy line, the essential oil treatment in pink line reduced non-beneficial bacteria like E. coli and increased beneficial bacteria like Propionibacterium. Thus, essential oil shift the microbiota into favorable status. Then what kind of good thing will happen when beneficial bacteria increase other than balancing microbiota? Here is an ex vivo study of piglet regarding to short-chain fatty acid. Favorable bacteria produces short-chain fatty acid which cause reduction of intestinal pH, aiding growth inhibition of pathogenic bacteria. Short-chain fatty acids support tissue development plus have an effect for reducing tissue inflammation. The addition of essential oil thymol and cinnamaldehyde improved propionic acid production by 43% and butyric acid for 47% compared to the control. Essential oil helps favorable bacteria fermentation and provide short-chain fatty acid. That is also beneficial to animal side as additional energy source. Now, as a final section for my slide, I would like to touch the topic of cycle of Nutribiosis, when nutrition and microbiota would met sufficiently in good condition. Here is a study done in China with 144 piglet for 35 days with combination use of mixed enzyme and essential oil. Gray is the control, and navy is the enzyme single use, and light blue is the essential oil single use. And the blue is the combination use of enzyme and essential oil. Left showed the average daily gain, and the right shows the diarrhea incidence. The message of this trial is the combination use of mixed enzyme and essential oil provide better growth than single usage. And it's clinically proved that 60% of reduction of diarrhea incidence. Thus, we can say improving nutrition digestibility by enzyme and controlling microbiota by essential oil will work for a good cycle of nutribiosis, and it maximizes the animal potential. As my last slide, I say nutribiosis is the concept of nutrition, microbiota, and immune function that are interactive with each other, achieving good digestion and well-balanced microbiota by adding effective feed additive to feed is for keeping the nutribiosis into good cycle, and also that provide animal less maintenance for gut energy that is also assured to contribute to economic benefit, and it facilitates good lift out for further growth till market. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Yoko. Excellent presentation.
Thank you.
I'm looking to the audience again. Does anybody have any questions? One thing that I noticed is that a pancreatic enzyme drops after weaning. I was wondering, is that related to weaning, or is that something that occurs anyway with the animal?
Yes, clearly see we clearly see the pancreatic enzyme reduction after weaning. It's related to the weaning period because enzyme usually produced by the gastro-intestinal tract it is also stimulated by the digester which pass through the gut. So it is related to the feed intake, I say. So it is clearly see that after weaning, because of the stress, the piglet feed intake is comes to be less, as we see the previous presenter, and also the feed content is dramatically changed from milk to solid feed. That also for the stress for the piglets.
Yeah, so at that moment the animals actually can do with a little bit of extra support. Yes. Audience, anybody? Then I have one last question for you. The strategy that you described with essential oils and an enzyme, is that applicable for growers, finishers, both? Could you explain a little bit about that?
I would say basically yes. Essential oil also have other function, like it has good flavor, like human garlic, so it stimulates the feed intake of the grower pigs. Also, but I have to say that for grower and finisher stages, the diet formulation changes a lot. So that means that it has dynamic change for the substrate part. So basically, enzyme always works for substrate. So we have to consider, we have to take it consider about the feed content change. So we need to choose the most appropriate enzyme along with the feed content.
Excellent. Thank you very much. audience doesn't have any questions. Your presentation was clear. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Right. Before I let you go, I think we've had a tremendous journey through the world of animal nutrition this afternoon, because we've heard very many tactics and strategies to help pig producers to get more out of their piglets and improve gut health. That knowledge that we talked about is enhanced for everybody. We've seen a strategy based on how to provide a better nutrition. We've looked at probiotics, we've looked at solid state fermentation, and also activated zinc oxide, and just now on essential oils as well as enzymes. So I think we've seen a big journey here. In case you wished to see this whole seminar again, or in case you wish to recommend it to somebody else, it is available at www.pigprogress.net as well as on our YouTube channel, so you can find it there and see it all again. I would like to thank our speakers, Dr. Leerman, Dr. Hubert Berg-Hansen, René Bonenkamp, as well as Yoko Noguchi for their excellent presentations. And I'd like to ask you to stay for a picture, and we have a little present for you as well. I'd like to thank the audience for being with us this afternoon. I'd like to thank the audience at a distance also for being with us. And I hope to see you soon at the next Big Progress event. Thank you very much.